All right. Thank you all so much. I want to welcome all of you to another edition of SIBA's Reader Meet Writer. I'm your host, Wiley Cash. I am the writer in residence at the University of North Carolina, Asheville, and I'm also the 2019 winner of the Southern Independent Bookseller Alliance's Pat Conroy Legacy Award. And I'm your host, coming to you from a very sunny and finally a cooler coast of the state of North Carolina. I want to talk a little bit about SIBA at the top of the show. SIBA, as I said, stands for the Southern Independent Bookseller Alliance, and this is an organization that represents just under 700 independently owned bookstores throughout the Southeast. And perhaps one of those independently owned bookstores invited you to this event today. Perhaps you found it on their community calendar. Perhaps you purchased Simon's books or another author who we featured this summer and this fall from that store. Please continue to support those stores. They're the lifeblood of our literary, cultural, civic, ethical communities, and all the support we can give them, especially in times like this, it's really, really important to do so. So I want to go ahead and give you a heads up for another event we have this week. On Thursday evening, in a couple of days, we're going to be hosting Margaret Kimberly for her new study, Prejudicial Black America and the Presidents. I think this is timely. We're in the midst of campaign season, electing a new president or keeping the president we've got. And I think these are really interesting book discussions to have and interesting authors to hear from in national moments like this one. But today we are joined by author Simon Stephenson, who has a new book out. And if you are interested in what Simon says today, or you have any questions about anything he mentions or anything he reads or any of the ideas he's sharing, don't hesitate to go to the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and enter a question for Simon, and I'll make sure that he has asked that question by the end of our show. When you ask your question, make sure to mention your name and the name of your home independent bookstore. So before we go any further, I want to introduce today's featured author. Simon Stephenson is a former Pixar screenwriter and an author based in Los Angeles. And if he cares to, I'll let him talk a little bit about what he's doing there. I have in mind that he will, based on some of the stuff I know he's going to share with you. His first book was Let Not the Waves of the Sea, and his newest book is Set My Heart to 5. Friends, I want to welcome Simon Stephenson. Simon, take it away.
Thank you, Wiley. Really appreciate being here. Thank you to the Southern Independent Booksellers Alliance. I was just telling Wiley that my first job in these United States was as a waiter and a line cook on the coastal Outer Banks of North Carolina. And full disclosure, I think I was pretty terrible at that. But your Southern hospitality showed through, and you were all very nice and forgiving of me. So hopefully we'll have hopefully there won't be anything to forgive today, but we're going to try something a bit new with the technology. So, hopefully it'll work great. And if it doesn't, I hope in advance that you can forgive me. So yeah, my name is Simon Stephenson, and I am a screenwriter and a writer based here in a rather smoggy Los Angeles, California today, unfortunately. I'm originally from Edinburgh in Scotland, and I've had detours in London and Glasgow and San Francisco along the way. I'm here to tell you about my book, which is called Set My Heart to 5, and it comes in this wonderful ombre effect, which I don't know if the technology is quite picking up, but that's the book. So to tell you about the book, first of all, please don't all log off when I tell you the first fact about the book, but the first fact is that the book is set in 2054. And I normally start then by saying that it's really important for me to say it's not a dystopia. I feel like we've all had, in one way or another, a lot of dystopias in our life in recent years. I enjoy reading them as much as anyone, but equally, I kind of felt like it didn't necessarily tally with my own thought of what the future might be like. In Britain, we have a phrase that is that things tend to go wrong because of not conspiracy, and I hope this isn't rude in the US, but cock up. And so my take is that when things go a bit wrong in the future, it's not going to be some sort of Hunger Games dystopian conspiracy. It's just going to be humans messing up in the way that we so often clearly do. So the book is set in a 2054 where, for instance, humans have locked themselves out of the internet. And we've done that crucially by forgetting the names of our favorite teachers and our first pets. I don't know if you've ever had the experience where you go to log into something and you've forgotten your password and it sends it to your old email, and to get into that email, you have to remember these bits of information that you once thought you'd never forget. I do that about 5 times a day. And so the idea is that happened on a critical day in 2037. Enough humans made that mistake. We all forgot those things. And so we locked ourselves out of the internet. And so planes started falling from the sky and, lots of terrible things like that. And then sort of some slightly, I guess, I don't know if it's funny, but some other things that have happened. So there's no longer a moon because none other than Elon Musk has incinerated the moon. He, of course, at the time said it was a hilarious prank, but he now just says it was an accident. He didn't mean it. He didn't know what he was doing. Likewise, New Zealand and North Korea have nuked each other into obliteration just through basically a misunderstanding. And so, it's someone described it as an all too human 2054, and I think I'll go with that. One great thing about 2054 though is that technology is going to have continued to progress, and by 2054 we are going to have androids, which I'm personally very excited about. And if I'm not a science fiction person by background, by trade, so this was all new territory for me. So maybe we're saying that an android specifically is a robot that has a human appearance, and obviously there's a question of how human that appearance is. So for instance, I think a lot of people think that androids are going to look, let me just get this right. Yeah, sorry, this is the technology mishap, but here we go. So I think that a lot of people think androids are going to look like this, so all sort of very modern and very sort of, but also very obviously not human. For better or for worse, I don't think androids are going to look like this. Unfortunately, I think androids are going to look more like this. So you see the problem. Like I don't mean that they're all going to look like me. I just mean they're going to look like generic average humans. And if you happen to see one in the street, you may well not know that they're an android. So, and then they're going to live in very ordinary places, such as Ypsilanti, Michigan, which is as ordinary an American Midwestern town as I could possibly think of. So my book is the story of an android called Jared, and Jared lives in Ypsilanti, Michigan, and he doesn't look like me, but he does just look like a sort of very, just an ordinary human that you'd see on the bus or in the street. And I'm going to just let Jared introduce himself now. Hi, my name is Jared. I am sincerely pleased to meet you. Also, I am a bot. Unless you have been living under a rock in North Korea or New Zealand, you of course know what a bot is. Nonetheless, I am programmed to relay the following dialogue to each new human I encounter. Please, do not be fooled by my human-like appearance. I am a mere bot. I do not have feelings or anything else that might be misconstrued as a soul. Instead, I have been programmed to a high level of proficiency in dentistry. Should you have any concerns, please immediately report me to the Bureau of Robotics. But humans rarely find this information calming. Instead, they see a fellow human standing in front of them, claiming he is not human. This bamboozles them. It often bamboozles them so profoundly that they exclaim, "But you look so human." I then patiently explain to them what they already know. That my body looks human because it is indeed a human body. It is engineered from DNA and constructed of cells the exact same way their own body is. It has the same basic needs: food, water, oxygen, regular exercise, and it can be injured or killed in all the same comically outlandish ways any other human body can. Yet, I am definitely not human, because the precious thing that sets humans apart is their feelings. And as a bot, I am specifically designed and programmed to be incapable of feelings. I can no more feel than a toaster. Ha! BTW. That is a hilarious joke because the programming language I run on was in first fact developed many years ago for use in the domestic toaster. So that's Jared introducing himself, and that's kind of the spiel that he has to give to people. I think two things that are sort of notable in that paragraph is one is that we're going to make androids do all the jobs that we don't want to do, which is why Jared is a dentist. And so but the flip side of that is androids are going to be brilliant dentists because they don't have feelings, they don't have any sympathy or empathy. So, they are going to get that wisdom tooth out no matter what. So Jared's a dentist. And then the other thing you might have picked up is the mention of the Bureau of Robotics. So the Bureau of Robotics are kind of the organization that are charged with overseeing the androids. If you kind of think of the DMV, so, slow, clunking, malfunctioning, difficult, but, ultimately they will get you. And then the other thing that was in that passage was the mention of feelings. So feelings are really at the center of Jared's story and at the center of the book, because as humans, the only advantage we have over artificial intelligence is going to be feelings. So they're going to be better than us at maths and language and science and pretty much everything apart from emotion. So we are therefore going to be very protective of feelings. And anytime an android, might begin to show any hint of feelings, we are going to have them incinerated, or we're going to at least have them wiped, but probably incinerated. So Jared's problem is that he begins to wonder if he might be experiencing feelings. And it's not actually, he doesn't begin to wonder that. He shares a medical building with a human doctor. And the human doctor begins to suspect that Jared may be depressed. And he says this to Jared. And Jared said, well, that's ridiculous because I'm an android and we don't have feelings, and depression is about feelings. So how could I possibly be depressed? And the human doctor then does something very clever. And what he does is he proposes an experiment. And of course, androids love experiments because they're science. And so the experiment that the doctor proposes is for Jared to go and watch a movie. And the thing about movies in 2054 is that, like all the big movies at the multiplex, they're all just going to be about killer robots, Killer Robots Gone Mad, Killer Robots 11, all of that stuff. So of course, Jared doesn't want to go and see that kind of movie, but the doctor says, no, the thing is, there's this other kind of movie, and it's called an old movie, and it plays in the small repertory theaters that have kind of struggled on. And so they agree that Jared is going to travel to Detroit, which is the nearest major city, and he's going to go and watch a movie. And so Jared, makes his way to Detroit, and he's kind of overawed by even just the theater. It's one of those lovely old theaters that's kind of in disrepair. And the movie that he sees is Love Story, which is I'm sure a lot of you know it, but for anyone who doesn't remember 1970, it's a movie about a young couple that fall in love when they're college students, and things don't end well. So I'm going to read just a little bit now where Jared has just watched the movie. And so remember that he's been sent here kind of as an experiment to see whether or not the movie can induce any feelings. And Jared's hypothesis is that, of course it can't, because he's an android. And just before we do this, I'm just going to bring up the kind of theater that Jared might be in. So let's see if I can make this magic of technology work again. Share the screen. This one here. Great. So imagine Jared is sitting in the theater, and he's actually just finished watching the movie. So that must just be the credits that are playing there. When the house lights came up, I discovered that my shirt was soaking wet. This was a mystery. After all, I had not purchased a soda because there were calorific sugar water. I could see no evidence of a leak coming from the ceiling above me. The nostalgics were sitting too far away and were anyway too lackadaisical to have played some kind of prank. Bots can produce tears only in response to a physical insult, such as a flying fragment of wisdom tooth. It took me some time to deduce that the unknown liquid must have been my own tears. Every other possibility had been eliminated. The only logical conclusion was that the Grand Theatre must recently have been cleaned with a powerful solvent that had irritated my eyes. I estimated the volume of my tears to be approximately 26 milliliters. It must have been a powerful solvent indeed. On the automatic bus back home, I noticed some words stuck in the forefront of my word cloud. What can you say about a 25-year-old girl who died? That she was beautiful and brilliant. That she loved Mozart and Bach and the Beatles, and me. The character of Oliver had spoken those words right at the start of the movie. At the time, it had seemed absurd. How could there be nothing else to say about a human who had lived for only a quarter of a century and then died? There had to be more. What was her name? Where had she lived? How had she fared in the great zero-sum game? Why had she died so young? Had she been killed by the most likely culprit, an automobile? And yet, as I rode the automatic bus home that night, I found that I entirely agreed with Oliver. In 100 minutes, the old movie had said everything that could possibly be said about an entire human lifetime. There was nothing more to say. So Jared goes back to Jared goes back to see his doctor friend, and his doctor friend says to him, well, how was the movie? And Jared says, it was fine, but I didn't feel anything. And of course, the doctor friend says, well, did anything unusual happen? And Jared says, well, I did get all this liquid, these tears coming from my eyes, but it was just allergies. And then the doctor explains that the movie that Jared actually saw was what's known as a tearjerker, which is, of course, a tearjerker. And so to Jared, this is terrible, because that was a really great scientific experiment. And if you cry tears at a tearjerker, then kind of by definition, you're feeling emotion. So Jared is, of course, a bit alarmed by this to start off with, because as we know, bots aren't allowed to feel, and if they do, there's terrible repercussions for that. But nonetheless, his doctor friend kind of sends him on this journey, and sort of encourages him to keep seeing movies and to keep to keep experimenting. He's supposed to go to a movie every week, and he also gives him this thing, which I'm going to try and again share now. So what Jared's doctor friend gives him is one of these. And this is called a feelings wheel. In my previous existence, I was a doctor, as a children's doctor, and one of my jobs involved working with first it involved working with kids with Asperger's and autism. And one of the tools that they use is this thing called a feelings wheel. And the idea is that, you give it to the person, and, when they're kind of feeling overwhelmed by emotion or feelings, or they simply aren't able to identify what these feelings are, then they can look on this thing and kind of pick out what feelings they have. So Jared, of course, has a great time investigating his feelings with the help of this tool. And of course, if you've never felt, bewildered before, or skeptical before, or pensive before, all of these feelings are actually just, to Jared, who's never had a feeling, these are all great fun, and he even enjoys things like regret. But the feeling he loves most of all is Schadenfreude, the German feeling of the German word for, pleasure in the small suffering of others. And he thinks that because the Germans are the only people that have a word for this feeling, the Germans must be the most fun people in the world. So Jared, kind of overwhelmed by all these feelings, and the Bureau of Robotics begin to close in on him. And so Jared gets this, odd idea, and it's this sort of fuzzy android logic. He gets this odd idea that what he's going to do is he is going to go to Los Angeles and write his own movie. because that's going to change the minds of humans. And unfortunately for Jared, I have been on that journey before him. I moved to Los Angeles to be a screenwriter about 7 years ago, and it's taken me most of that time, but I finally worked out the algorithm for screenwriting in Hollywood, and it looks like this. So you can see there at the top of the at the top of the page, we have is everything with the movie going as well as it possibly can. You can say yes or no, but nonetheless, the next step, you have to think about, should I replace the writer? And then whether you've thought about that or not before, then you have to ultimately replace the writer. And there should actually be just like a loop that goes from that bottom box right round to the top of the box. So, which is all of which to say is, Jared sets off to come here to Los Angeles, California with the dream of changing the world by writing a movie, and things don't necessarily go as smoothly as he would hope.
Thank you so much, Simon. I want to invite our audience members to type any questions they may have into the Q&A tab, and I will share them with Simon in just a moment. But first, I have a couple of questions for you, Simon, to kind of get us started. And please, when you type your question in, make sure that you say your name and your home bookstore. So I'll say, my name's Wiley. My home bookstores are Malaprops in Asheville, North Carolina, and Pomegranate Books here in Wilmington, North Carolina. But Simon, I've got a question for you, something that when you were talking, it dawned on me, especially seeing the slide, that photo of the old movie theater. This is a world where people have been, locked out of the internet. We've kind of let loose of the technology that in many ways animates us now. And were you trying to make an ironic statement, or maybe turn our minds back to those pure, what could be analog pleasures in some ways of going to an old movie theater, taking part in an old movie watching experience, and being untethered to devices, to the digital world, to the web spaces? Were you thinking about that writing this book?
I think it was definitely part of it. I mean, when you were mentioning there about the role that local bookstores play that you mentioned at the start, I definitely share all of those feelings. And I certainly worry that our culture becomes so homogenized, and kind of one of the jokes in the book is that if we're not careful, by 2054 there'll just be one movie that comes out each year, and it'll come out of the holidays, and it'll be 12 hours long, and it'll be a Marvel, Disney, DC, whatever crossover with, Star Wars probably thrown in there, and Jurassic Park as well. And so in terms of those, those smaller pleasures, I mean, partly, yes, I was kind of trying to think about how, where you would look for alternative culture in 2054. And I quite like the idea that, because of this digital crash, that we've lost all of this data, the idea is that really the things that will survive would actually be the things that were on a physical medium. So books will survive, which is wonderful for all of us. But in the film world, the films that will survive would be the things that were stored physically, that were stored on film rather than on data. And of course, the things that will survive will probably just be the ones that they have a lot of copies of. And, the last time they were making a lot of prints of films probably was the 90s, that maybe even into the early 2000s. So, that's why the repertory theaters are showing things like, Forrest Gump and Shawshank Redemption and all those kind of movies. And I quite like the joke that, like, if you're, my cinephile friends are, always going off to see some 7-hour long black and white French documentary, and they come back and you say, how was it? And they say, it was great. You wouldn't have liked it, but it was really fantastic. And I love the idea that those same people will be going off to see Titanic, and then coming back and being sort of, a little bit intellectually superior about, they've seen this wonderful film from 1996 that, I won't get because it's, it's too smart and intellectual.
We get some questions popping up, and I want to encourage y'all to ask. We have a few more, and I've just got a couple more. I'm going to be selfish for a second. It's so funny that you mentioned Titanic, Shawshank Redemption, Forrest Gump, these big cathartic films, these iconic. I mean, you can remember where you were. They were such events. All of these films. The first time you saw, Shawshank Redemption on TNT, because it plays on a loop there. But these movies succeed largely because they are so sentimental. I'm not going to say they're melodramatic, but melodrama certainly plays a part. Whereas when I think about the internet, I think about the meme. I think about the witty TikTok video, where so many things are completely absent of all sentimentality. And here you have this android, this robot that is going toward sentimentality and toward emotion. So can you talk about your experience? And I'm not asking you to rat on your colleagues in the screenwriting world. Is there a push and pull there for you to speak to the contemporary moment of, sly witticisms and quick wink, wink, nod, nod jokes? And how do you balance that? Because this is a sentimental novel in many ways. How do you balance that in your own writing or in your screenwriting or in the novel?
Sure, absolutely. It's a great question, and it's something I genuinely spend a lot of time thinking about, because I completely agree that, the lure for me of those movies, I mean, and certainly, they all have, their problems in various ways, and a lot of them become more problematic, in hindsight. But the lure for me is really, I mean, sentimentality. The word I like is heart. Like I like to say that they have heart, and so Thelma and Louise, something like that. Just tremendous amount of heart to it. But I completely agree that our culture now is, we're very cynical now. And it's understandable in lots of ways. Maybe we were more earnest in the that time period, the 90s. But I think, as you say, that the sort of the way in which we interact with culture, so the little short snippets on, Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, and I'm as guilty of this as anybody, that the easy likes are for the little sly sardonic quip. They're not for being earnest or enthusiastic or appreciative about anything. And I think I think that's a challenge, because I think if you released Forrest Gump today, I doubt it would do well. I think people would find it really patronizing, and it's always the movie that I read Jared going to see, Love Story, is interesting because that's from 1970, and in some ways that might be the 1970 version of Forrest Gump, that it's even more earnest than Forrest Gump, and it's even more sentimental, but it's actually now it doesn't stand up, it's almost unwatchable in parts because it's so manipulative. And I guess we do become more as consumers, as viewers, as audiences, as readers, we do become sort of I guess just more alert to the tricks that writers are playing on us. And I think it is a real balance. I think I was lucky with this novel in that because the world itself has kind of, it's gone a bit wrong. I'm calling it a mystopia, not a dystopia. Because that world's just gone a bit wrong. The combination of that, and then, Jared, who is, the most earnest person you could imagine, I think that, hopefully does the offsetting that you're talking about, that you kind of have to try and find that balance. And I wonder if, as we, it feels like, looking, at Love Story, Forrest Gump, wherever we are now, it does feel like that the earnestness and the sentimentality has necessarily gone down, and the cynicism's gone up. And I don't know if you extrapolate that trend. I don't know where that ends.
Well, I think it's interesting, and I'll get to the questions now, but I do want to say, I think it's interesting because what you're saying, Love Story, Forrest Gump, those are still classic tales. Loss, outsider, trying to be the insider. There are no new themes. These themes will always stand the test of time, but there's just new ways of expressing these themes. So I think what you're saying with what you just said about trying to do this in the book, it's a constant balancing act, because we're constantly assessing and reassessing the abilities of our readers to dissect the craft of telling the story and things like that. But these themes will always stand, your Jared is the consummate outsider in many ways, very similar to Forrest Gump. So our first question comes from Jane. Her bookstore is Copperfish Books down in Punta Gorda, Florida. And Jane asks, does Jared find a friend in California? And I don't know if you want to give anything away, but can you give us maybe, and perhaps answering Jane's question, a quick snapshot of some of the challenges that Jared confronts emotionally throughout the novel?
Absolutely, yeah. Well, it's a great question, and again, it probably is in that slight territory that we don't want to give too much away. But certainly, Jared's journey is very much motivated by a search for connection. So one of the things that sets him on the way is he realizes. Yes, the Bureau of Robotics are closing in, but really the deeper thing is he realizes that he has this feeling that he doesn't like, and this feeling is kind of almost always with him in the background, and it's just there, this sort of low hum, and the feeling is loneliness. And when Jared experiences this feeling, him and the doctor work it out that this is the feeling he's experiencing, and the doctor then shows him a very particular movie, and the movie that the doctor shows him is Blade Runner, which of course is a movie about androids learning to feel, and all of that stuff. And this movie really, for Jared, does this incredible thing, because it's the first time he's ever seen himself represented on screen. It's the first time he's just really felt validated in that way. And obviously a lot of that going on as well in the world. People haven't been represented enough, and so, but what this stirs in Jared is this desire to head out into the world and see if he can find anyone that's like him. And again, I'm not going to give too much away, but one of the things that Jared really marvels most about humans, and indeed one of the things I think is most special about humans, is our capacity for friendship. So the desire for friendship, companionship, love. I think those are probably inevitable parts of any emotional awakening. But for Jared, it's just the real thing that kicks it off is just this not wanting to be lonely anymore. And I think that's probably quite a universal thing that many of us in one way or another can relate to.
And you might be able to parlay that last little bit into the next question. It's another question from Copperfish Books. Copperfish Books always represents in these events. Right. This question's from Helen. And Helen was 5 minutes late to our show because she was at Copperfish Books getting this book.
Perfect. Oh, well, thank you, Helen. We appreciate it.
I know, and now she's home. So you sold one book in America. You know that.
That's there we go. I made it. Brilliant. Wonderful. and Florida's the place.
Florida's the place. If you're going to sell a book, it's Florida.
Heading there. Brilliant.
But Helen asks, she wonders where Simon found the inspiration for his book. And I wonder, and another person a little bit farther down, Bruce from His Bookstore's novel in Memphis, Bruce asks, how much of Jared is you? And to answer Helen's question, or maybe even Bruce's question, where did the inspiration come from? How much of yourself is in this novel?
Brilliant, yeah. Great questions. Thank you, Helen and Bruce. In the kind of big picture, I'd wanted to write a novel for a really long time. I'd published this memoir way back when in 2011, and my understanding was I was going to then write a novel, because that's what writers do. They write novels, serious writers write novels, and it was time to write a novel. And I sat down and I started 4 or 5, and I just couldn't. I didn't feel like I had a story to tell. I mean, and looking back, I think they were actually all perfectly reasonable stories, and it was just, it wasn't the right moment for me. My memoir had been about losing my brother, and that had obviously been a really, just such an important story to tell. And for a long time, I couldn't find anything that sort of measured up to that. So I got this, I was lucky to get this strange diversion into screenwriting. The backstory to that is I'd been a children's doctor in London, and I wrote a screenplay about a depressed children's doctor who hated his life and desperately just needed a change. And I don't know where I got that idea from. It just popped into my head like creative magic. And so but that opened up some doors. And then kind of the culmination of that was that I got a job to write a film at an animation company in San Francisco. And so I lived in the Bay Area for a couple of years, and I hadn't spent much time there before. It'd always been, a place I'd thought a lot about and featured heavily in things I'd read and movies I'd watched and stuff. And it's an amazing place. It's a super beautiful place. It's also like a very oddly kind of like futuristic place, because every third or fourth person you meet is working on some sort of app or startup, and some of them sound like they're brilliant things, and then some of them you kind of dig down a bit and you think, well, is like home delivery euthanasia really something we need an app for? Like is that actually a good idea? So I kind of felt like I was and I think it was that time, I think we probably all noticed it as well, with like in a space of quite a few short years, suddenly we had, Uber, and not so much taxis. And suddenly there were these scooters on the street, and, technology just seemed to be changing very fast. And particularly in the Bay Area, I think, they were having like self-driving Ubers were being tested already on the streets and that sort of thing. So I kind of felt like already we were on the cusp of this future, and I'm sort of interested to write about that, and again interested to write about it kind of going wrong in those human ways. And then my day job, the animation company I worked at, I think I'm contractually still not supposed to say, but it's actually, they wrote it on the cover of the book, so I can say it's Pixar. I was working at Pixar, who are of course well known for their just the beauty of their storytelling, and particularly the emotion of their storytelling. And they understandably work very hard on that. And so my day job was, I was kind of working in this laboratory for emotional storytelling, and then by night I was kind of walking around this city thinking, wow, are we in the future already? What's happening here? And I think those two things just kind of coalesced, and this is really the only time I think it's ever happened in my life. Normally I have to drag my ideas kicking and screaming out of years of work and research and thinking, and this one, kind of the idea of an android who wants to be a screenwriter, just kind of, that one really came to me, and I can kind of still remember like exactly where it was when I had that idea. And I went for a big long walk around San Francisco that night, and I walked up and over the Golden Gate Bridge, and that walk actually became something that's incorporated into the book. So I think that's where it came from. And then in terms of how much of me is Jared, I mean, I probably have to say in truth like a horrifying amount. I think that I mean, obviously I have feelings. I guess I don't mean that so much. It's just like, Jared finds a lot of stuff about, the way we live quite odd. And, I find a lot of stuff about the way we live quite odd as well. And then just, I think that bigger thing of, feeling like, for whatever reason, like, and whether it's true or not, like I don't even know if I'm technically entitled to these feelings, but often feeling like an outsider, and often feeling like, you can kind of see where community is, and you can see where the fun is happening, and you desperately want to go and be at the center of that, but you just kind of you overthink it, or you make the awkward joke, and I think those things which Jared does, I certainly do them all the time, and I suspect probably a lot of people feel similar.
Yeah, I love that answer. It reminded me of two things, and I'm sure you read a lot of books, as do I, and have both of us having written books. I swear I can be reading, even if it's a novel, and I can come across a part in the novel and something in my, I don't know if it's a writer's sense or a human sense, where I can think, that happened to this author. This sentence is a personal thing they witnessed, and it just kind of stands out. And the novel's not about them, it's not about their whole experience, but this particular thing is. So I'm thinking about your walk around the city, and then the walk around the city in the book. And then your comment about kind of feeling like an outsider. I was talking with an author over the weekend, and he said he's a regional writer. He still lives in the region he's from, but even though he's a hardcore insider in this region, he's always kind of felt like an outsider, because as a writer, he's spent his whole life observing things and not necessarily participating in everything to the same degree that everyone else is, because you always kind of have to keep that cool eye of observation on everything. It's really interesting.
That's so fascinating, isn't it? And I guess it begs the question of which one comes first, right? Are we writers because we're naturally, a little bit distant and we like to watch things, or is it because we're writers that we do that stuff? But yeah, I definitely, I think it's probably I think there's probably few writers that don't consider themselves outsiders. Actually, I would imagine. I mean, maybe it's why we start writing. I don't know.
Well, even the writers that I see on book tour at speaking events that are really outspoken and these huge personalities, and everybody's like, "Oh my God, they're so funny!" They come off the stage and they're back to their introverted selves, and they're just exhausted and they're sweating, and they just want to go to the bar and sit alone. We have do I?
No, you go ahead, Wiley, sorry.
We maybe have to have time for one more question, and this one comes from Stephanie, Malaprops, Asheville, North Carolina. She says, what are some of your literary influences? Hearing you read brings Douglas Adams pleasantly to mind. So what were some of the literary influences on this new book?
Wow, well, that's a great compliment. Thank you. I'm, of course, a huge fan of Douglas Adams, who is, the master of, I guess, comedic science fiction, so I appreciate that, and I appreciate it coming from North Carolina as well. So in terms of this book, one of the books that really had a big influence on me was Jennifer Egan's A Visit from the Goon Squad. I mean, I'm sure you guys probably, a lot of you remember that book and read it, and it was such a wonderful book. And it influenced me in a couple of ways. One was that I was lucky enough to hear her talk. She came to Edinburgh, where I'm from, to the book festival, and the Visit from the Goon Squad is a book of sort of connected short stories, and they're all set around the music industry. And they said, you know, why did the book take this format? And she said, well, you know, I felt like if I was going to write about music, the book really had to be kind of take the form of that music. And the form of that music was polyphonic. It wasn't, you know, a single melody. And that kind of blew my mind. Like that was really just something that stayed with me for years. And so when it became time to, you know, when I had that idea to write this book about the screenwriting android, I kind of stole like that not that concept, but like the ethos of that, I guess, because, you know, I set myself a similar challenge, which was, can I write a book that has the feel of a movie? Like, can I write a book that, you know, in an ideal world might make the reader feel some of the same things that I feel when I first watched Forrest Gump or I first watched Shawshank Redemption. So that book was a big one. I think then in terms of like most of the, like for my money, most of the great comedic writers tend to have been Americans, right? So I do read a lot of, and the old ones particularly, like I'm always telling everyone about Ring Lardner and his baseball stories. You know, he has this, he used to write this column in the back of the Saturday Evening Post in the 20s. And at one point, I think it was the most widely read thing in America. And Virginia Woolf said, you know, she had no idea about baseball, but this was, you know, the best writing she'd ever read. And on that sort of sentence by sentence level, it's just so funny. So Ring Lardner, similarly, Damon Runyon, like those, and, you know, back to Mark Twain, I guess, just that there's such a rich theme of American humorous writing that, you know, we have lots of wonderful writers in Britain, but I feel like that it's probably the American humorists that have been the real big influence on me.
Well, Simon, you are here now, and we'll claim you. You're part of our tradition.
Thank you. Wow, what a thrill.
Ring Lardner to Simon Stephenson. So welcome. This has been a pleasure. This has been really wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us, and thank all of you for coming today, and thank you to the independent bookstores for bringing readers to meet writers like Simon Stephenson. I want to remind everybody to support your local independently owned bookstore, and I want to invite you all to join us again Thursday evening in 2 days at 7 p.m. here on the East Coast. We'll be hosting Margaret Kimberly, who will be discussing her new book, Prejudential: Black America and the President. It sounds like a timely and important read, and we hope to see you all on that evening. So until then, thank you all so much for joining us, and thank you again, Simon.
Great, thank you. And thank you, everyone. Thank you.